And we will move on to our next report, which is Growth Management Act, County and City Compliance with the state's 120-day permitting requirement. Do any of the agents, does DNR want to comment?
Yes, we do have just a few brief comments.
Please proceed.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Thomas Gorman, Aquatic Resources Division Manager at DNR. I'm here with one of my DNR colleagues, Michael Reckner, Aquatic Resources Assistant Division Manager for Policy and Planning. First, we want to thank the SAO for their work on this audit. Everyone we worked with from the auditor's office was great. They were always very professional, and all their data needs were clearly communicated. DNR's experience and perspective on this audit was ultimately favorable. We felt the final report showed that the vast majority of leases reviewed by the auditors had produced consistent and fair lease rates. The audit highlighted a few key recommendations, and I just want to share a few additional perspectives on those three recommendations. The first recommendation, to develop and implement improved standards for consistent documentation of lease rate determinations. At DNR, consistency is a major goal, and we will use this report to further improve our practices. This recommendation was positively received because 2 out of the 21 leases highlighted were older leases, while the newer agreements did include sufficient documentation. This supports changes DNR made starting approximately 10 years ago, and is a process we will continue to work on and to improve. Also, SAO affirmed that we were on the right path, and per the report identified multiple elements of DNR's processes targeted at setting rates consistently, including our templates, policies, and procedures, as well as lease reviews and our approval process. The second recommendation is to improve the completeness and reliability of the data needed to assess consistency of lease rates. DNR is actively pursuing a new data management software solution. The data sought by SAO was all at DNR, but due to antiquated software, it was not always easily accessed. Prior to this audit, DNR started working on this new software solution, so this report is very timely and will help us refine the new software that will be launched in 2025. The third recommendation, to develop and implement policies and procedures or written guidance documents for determining aquaculture lease rates. We agree that additional guidance could strengthen consistency and transparency in aquaculture rates. SAO highlighted 2 newer areas as models. Those included mussel rafts and coastal oyster rent structures. These approaches and guidance were developed in 2018 and 2020, respectively, for those 2 types of aquaculture. And this affirmed from the SAO that we will look at these newer negotiations as a method to structure additional guidance around other aquaculture types. This concludes our comments. So I want to again thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss the SAO performance audit today. And I am happy to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gorman. Are there any other staff members from DNR that are wishing to speak? If not, I'm going to open it up to members for questions to DNR. If any member has a question, please raise your hand in Zoom. So far, not seeing any pop up, so I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to DNR as well as the State Auditor's Office. And that will conclude this report, the presentation on this report. And we will now move to number 2 on the agenda, which is the Growth Management Act, County and City Compliance with the state's 120-day permitting requirement. And State Auditor staff will come forward and present. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Carolyn Cato, and I'm a Senior Performance Auditor with the Office of the Washington State Auditor. With me today are my colleagues, Robert Eveshank, who is also a Performance Auditor, and Deborah Hintz, who is a Lien Specialist that works at our Center for Government Innovation. Today, we are going to present the results of the audit that evaluates county and city compliance with the state's 120-day permitting requirement. Before we begin the presentation, I'd like to take a moment to thank management and staff at the counties and cities who participated in this audit. I'd like to begin with a summary of our key audit results. We found that audited governments met state-mandated permitting deadlines inconsistently in some areas. We also found that although audited governments are using many of the leading practices, they could adopt practices to further improve permit review times. Lastly, we found that only 1/3 of local governments statewide published required annual performance reports on permit processing times. Next, we will share why we did this audit. The Growth Management Act governs development and land use for local governments. It requires most local governments to issue a final decision on permit applications within 120 days. And certain local governments must also publicly report on how long it takes to process permits. The key reason for putting these requirements in place was to provide predictability to applicants on when to expect a final decision on their permit application. We decided to evaluate this area due to its importance to land developers, professional builders, and property owners. The Growth Management Act requires that fast-growing counties and the cities within them develop comprehensive plans and regulations to guide growth and limit urban sprawl. Each local government establishes safety, environmental, and other standards in its local plans and regulations. Land developers, professional builders, and property owners must obtain permission from the appropriate local government before carrying out development or building activity. These comprehensive plans must also address timely and fair permit processing. The permit review process is meant to ensure that development and building projects comply with those plans and regulations. We answered 2 questions in this audit. To what extent are local governments complying with the 120-day rule, including the annual reporting requirement, and are local governments using processes appropriately for project permit reviews that exceed 120 days? Our goal when selecting governments for this audit was to provide a picture of how permitting works statewide by including a good mix of counties and cities on both sides of the Cascades. We chose high-growth areas with a variety of population sizes. We focused our review of permits in calendar years 2019 through 2022. We selected 6 local governments for this audit, 4 cities, Bellingham, Shoreline, Richland, and Vancouver, and 2 counties, Snohomish and Kittitas. In our report, we refer to 3 broad categories of permits that are involved in development projects. While each local government might use slightly different naming conventions, these broad categories are useful when looking at how long the process takes. First are land use or planning permits, which deal with whether a proposed project can be built on the specific piece of land. Second are civil engineering or public works permits, which deal with preparing the land for building. And third are building permits, which deal with the vertical structures. Land use permits focus on issues such as compliance with zoning, as well as the project's effect on traffic and proximity to critical areas, such as habitat conservation or hazardous areas. Examples of land use permits include subdivisions, also known as plats, use permits, and environmental permits. In addition, land use permits may also require public meetings or hearings. Land use permits generally take longer to review because they are the most complicated. This graph shows the percentage of land use permits that were processed within 120 days, identified by the blue bars, and those that took more than 120 days, identified by the orange bars. 4 local governments processed more than 75% of their permits within 120 days. Civil permits are the second category that focus on preparing the land for building, both at the surface and underground. Examples include utility connections, grading, and controlling stormwater runoff. Civil permits are generally faster to process than land use permits, although some can run into environmental issues that complicate reviews. 4 governments processed more than 75% of their civil permits within 120 days. The data on the previous 2 slides showed the time from when the review starts to when a final decision was made for the permit application, shown here on this slide as total time. We also show the time the government actually spent reviewing the application, listed here as hands-on government time. Both Snohomish County and Vancouver track information necessary to calculate this hands-on government time, but the other 4 governments did not. For Snohomish County, using the hands-on government time showed modest improvements with meeting the 120-day deadline, while Vancouver showed greater improvements in meeting the deadline when comparing total time to hands-on government time. The final stage of a project typically requires building permits. The question is precisely what will be built, and examples include the structure itself and also the plumbing and electrical work within the structure. All 6 local governments process more than 90% of building permits within 120 days. These permits focus on ensuring the structure meets building codes and standards to ensure they will be safe for occupants. Robert is now going to cover some key factors that can slow down the processing of land use permits.
Thank you, Carolyn. Hello, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Robert Eveshank, Performance Auditor with the State Auditor's Office. We focused our detailed testing on key factors for slow processing of land use permits, as we found local governments missed the deadline more for land use permits than they did for civil or building. One overarching theme we found was that some permits are complex or difficult to process. Local government permit review generally includes detailed project plans that must be examined by multiple subject matter areas across departments and divisions. In addition, available vacant land can be difficult to build on, especially in more populous areas where more flat and simple land is already developed. What remains may contain or be next to critical areas that often require the local governments to request additional surveys from the applicants. A variety of other factors may slow down processing. I'll talk about just 2 examples here, but we provide more details in the report. First, we found some governments had insufficient staff, including engineers. This was especially acute at Snohomish County, which carried out a successful retirement incentive program to save costs during the pandemic, but recently has had too few engineers for the workload. Delays on permits can also occur when they are subject to hearing examiner adjudication. While many decisions are made by department staff, some are made by a hearing examiner who is hired by the local government to make a legal determination on whether an application complies with local development regulations. In addition, 2 audited governments used waivers to eliminate deadlines entirely. Using waivers does not align with state law, and it increases the risk for additional delays because a project without a deadline is less likely to be completed in a timely manner. At Richland, reviewers initiated waivers at the time of application for about 6 months, but ceased the practice in May 2022. At Snohomish County, we found reviewers typically initiated deadline waivers after the first review by sending a waiver form with the review comments. However, state law does allow extending a deadline for a specified time period. The bottom line is that extensions are okay, but waivers are not. Transparency and predictability are also important goals in addition to the performance of permit processing. Reporting on permit review timelines helps ensure transparency and predictability for applicants. However, out of 49 local governments required to publish annual reports on permit performance, only 1/3 of local governments did so. We surveyed all local governments that are required to publish reports so that we could measure statewide compliance with this requirement. However, we found that of those that did report, few included all required information. We reviewed the reports for 5 required elements, such as the total volume of annual applications received, and the element least likely to be included in all reports was the number of deadline extensions. In their survey responses, most governments mentioned limitations with their information technology or concerns with data quality. Specific issues included older systems that lacked functionality or newer systems that staff were still learning to use. In addition to reporting, governments could adopt practices to further improve their permit processes. The audited governments met 3 leading practices related to education and outreach to applicants. First, ensuring complete applications. Second, building mutual understanding. And third, engaging stakeholders early. All 6 audited governments used a variety of techniques to achieve the goals of these 3 practices. For example, they designated staff to assist applicants, they informed applicants of the application requirements, and they held pre-application meetings. However, audited governments had mixed performance in implementing 3 other leading practices. We found all 6 audited governments at least partially applied the practice related to information technology. Using information technology tools can help improve communication with applicants and maintain accurate project records. The next leading practice is systems for staffing flexibility to maintain performance during periods of high permit volume. We found 4 audited governments used on-call contractors as a staffing contingency. The last leading practice is to analyze processes, performance, and costs. This includes documenting and analyzing the full permit process to identify and prioritize improvements. Governments that are already completing most of their reviews within 120 days might not improve performance dramatically by employing additional leading practices. Nonetheless, periodically analyzing their permitting processes will likely prove helpful. And those governments struggling to meet permitting times can benefit most from implementing all 3 of these practices. We'll return to the important topic of continuous improvement after a brief summary of our audit recommendations. In summary, we made a series of recommendations to the 6 audited counties and cities in 2 areas. First was to address permit review performance that does not achieve the 120-day compliance. For example, we recommend that local governments implement continuous improvement methods and analyze their costs of service and staffing levels. Second was to address a lack of transparency and predictability for permit applicants in their jurisdictions. For example, we recommend the local governments assess and develop capabilities such as information technology to meet permit reporting requirements. And we consider these audit results so broadly applicable that we suggest that all Washington counties and cities consider implementing the practices highlighted in the report. In addition, we suggest all counties and cities attend a no-cost informative webinar provided by our office's Center for Government Innovation to learn about process improvement methods and services the center offers. Now I'll hand it over to Deborah to speak more about the center.
Thank you, Robert. I'm Deborah Hentz, and I'm here today to tell you a little more about the Center for Government Innovation. Using I-900 performance audit funding, our small team provides resources and services on topics such as cyber smart, financial intelligence, and lean methodology tailored to local governments, helping them solve problems and improve performance. The stars on this map are just a representation of the local governments I've worked with over the past 10 years, helping them improve the flow of their permit processes. That work was not associated with any audit issues, but rather is a no-cost service the center provides to all local governments across the state of Washington. The service that we provide teaches lean methodology and facilitates teams of subject matter experts working together to make process improvements in their permit centers. Lean process improvement strives to increase workflow efficiency while also developing those staff members to contribute at a higher level of leadership. We use tools such as process mapping to create a visual picture of their permit process workflow, to uncover waste in such areas as lacking standard process steps, which cause poor handoff predictability, and errors caused by miscommunication between team members. The Center for Government Innovation will continue to offer this individualized service to any organization that makes a request to our office. And as Robert mentioned, we will also be offering a free informative webinar in June of this year with the purpose of teaching attendees how they can make improvements in their own permit workflows using the fundamentals of lean methodology. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Deborah. This concludes our presentation, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have today.
Thank you for the report. We do have a question. I will note, I will just put out a call before I go to Senator Mullet. If anybody has a question, please raise your hand. The chair has a question. So we'll go to Senator Mullet, then myself, and then Representative Paulette.
Thanks. And I'm going to poll Senator Hasagawa. I have a few here, if that's okay. I guess my first question was, a lot of the permit stories we've heard from people have been centered around King County and Seattle. So I guess, how did you determine that that was going to be a representative sample, I guess, of the ones you chose? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you for that question. We actually did consider King County and Seattle in the course of making our selection. But what occurred was we selected Seattle, and then we learned that the Seattle City Auditor was also conducting an audit of this area. So due to that, and they were literally going to be conducting it at the same time, we decided to use our resources elsewhere in the state. So that's what ultimately why we made that decision.
Okay, gotcha. The second one I had is you said the 49 cities are required to report, only a third are doing it. What's our best avenue to actually get the data from all 49 cities who are supposed to be reporting their permit timelines? Like, what's our main suggestion takeaway, I guess?
Well, there are going to be some new changes coming about with the revisions in the law. And so Department of Commerce is going to have a role in that and with helping cities and counties in that area. And so they're going to be developing a template. And I know that that is something that's underway right now. And so that is something that we do anticipate changing in the future with the revisions in the law.
Okay. I admit, I feel bad admitting this in public, but I wasn't aware of the Center for Government Innovation, I guess. Where does that funding come from for that Center for Government? It sounds like they're doing a lot of cool work to try to help people have better process to be more efficient. What's the background there?
It's actually the I-900 funding that we receive for performance audits, and the center, really their role is to help local governments improve their operations, as Deborah was explaining earlier. And so I can turn it over to Deborah to share a little bit more about the center if you want to, Deborah. Anything else you might want to share?
Yeah, so the only thing I would add is just that our main goal is really to be training and facilitating. We are looking at the ability to train local governments to do their own work long-term. So we're seen as somebody that just steps in, and especially for some of the smaller governments that may not be able to afford outside facilitators or trainers, we provide it as a no-cost service, as Carolyn had said, from I-900.
And then, Deborah, do you find people are pretty willing to take you up on that offer normally? Or is it like, is there anything we should be doing on our side, I guess, in the legislature to encourage more people to take advantage of that resource?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you for that. I've been with the center for 10 years. I will tell you in the beginning, it was a little hard to get past the fact that I'm in the auditor's office. That is not the problem anymore at all. We get a lot of places coming and completely understanding. The issue tends to be more time. So to do the work that at least I do in Lean is you need a certain amount of time to be able to really look at some of the tools, the process mapping, et cetera. And staffing is so tight today and people are really stressed. It's the time element. That's the only thing that we really face today.
Okay. And then my final one, and I apologize. Thank you, Representative Orcutt, for the time. So Senate Bill 5290 was focused on kind of this expedited permitting effort in the 23 session. Like, is it too early to say, or you guys really didn't look at it? Like, do we think that Senate Bill 5290 is going to have any impact on some of these numbers, or hard to say still?
We actually didn't look at that within the course of this audit, but that was definitely something, one of the reasons we decided to move forward with this audit, because the things that are potentially causing delays right now, could still potentially cause delays in the future, even with the changes. And so, that's one of the reasons we're even offering the webinar to, help local governments even beyond where the 6 that we looked at within this particular audit. And so ultimately, hopefully, with the recommendations we're making, we did share that information with the local governments across the state, as well as the information about the webinar. So hopefully this will help them further with their processes.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Hey, thank you very much. Chair Orcutt, turning it back to you.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question, and then we'll get to Representative Paulette. You show a 120-day timeline, and that's what this is all about. Can you talk about the determination of when that 120-day clock starts? And were there any times when you disagreed with the local government as when that clock should have started? And if so, how is that reflected in the report?
You want to take it? Okay.
Yeah, so that was not part of the scope of the audit that we looked at. We just took whatever date they said was complete as the start of that clock, and then really we were just looking at, after that point, what was going on then. So that's definitely another area that there could be, that could be looked at. Again, that could be using the continuous improvement process. That's another area that local governments could be looking at that process as well.
Thank you. Representative Paulette?
Thank you. I'd like to ask the audit team and then local governments to include when they respond, to discuss a little bit about the role of the staffing shortages, and not just staffing shortages, but if I'm a relatively small local government and don't have need for a geotechnical engineer every week, the ability to be able to hire someone on a timely basis, or even if I have someone on staff, what happens when they're on vacation for a month? And are there solutions to that, such as having Commerce provide access to a pool of qualified people that are paid for as a rotating core or something like that?
That's an excellent question. Do you want to talk?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that would be covered under the fifth leading practice that we presented on, the systems for staffing flexibility. We don't suggest any specific solution. We put it on the local governments to say, what are you doing to do this? But we heard of not just the on-call contractors, but there can be pooling with adjacent local governments. So whatever the solution might be, it's not necessarily one size fits all, but definitely that's something that we're recommending the local governments look at to figure out how can they address those types of concerns.
Follow-up?
So you didn't necessarily, I didn't just miss it, you didn't look at what the state could be doing to provide access to a pool of qualified people so that local governments aren't competing with one another. And let me just make a comment here that wearing a higher ed hat and post-secondary education committee, workforce development committee member, that obviously we need investment by the state in terms of producing more people to fill the essential planning and other roles here. But you didn't look at what we can do other than you asked local governments.
That is correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, Senator Hasagawa had his hand up, but it's down now. Senator, did you get your question answered?
Yeah, thank you. I did. Senator Mullet asked the question. I was just curious about the Center for Government Innovation, whether that's actually a state agency or not. And what I heard was that it's funded by I-900 money and situated in the SAO's office. Is that right?
That's correct.
I did have a different question, though, now that it had to do with, I think it's what Representative Warcutt might have been asking, but I'm not clear on the question of vesting of the permits once they're issued. Did that ever come up? Is the project vested when the application is submitted or when the permit is issued or when the application is actually even asked for? Do you know if that's an issue? Or was that outside the scope of the study?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's not something that we specifically tested for, but it is something that came up, a challenge that local governments deal with. And it is part of the reason why they might want to close a permit that's been inactive for a long time, because as new codes come out, they would want to review that application with the current code. And if the application had started many years ago, That would be that idea of vesting, is like it would be reviewed when it was submitted. And yeah, it could be even potentially before it was considered complete. So there's definitely that challenge for the local governments.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Thank you, Senator Hasagawa. Senator Lovelet, please ask your question.
Thank you so much. Just actually a quick comment from planners' perspectives. There was a proviso that was introduced last year to help with the pipeline of folks getting into college and technical programs to become planners. But did want to double down on that comment about when an application is deemed complete. Those are kind of two different time clocks. And, you know, that has its own set of complications that comes with it. But then additionally wanted to just editorialize that our cities and counties are now going through their comprehensive plan processes. And so that is really demanding a lot of necessary staff time to accomplish that and all of the public meetings and everything that goes with those requirements. And Commerce is also slammed with that work. So I think at a time when we're expecting them to turn around a permit in a fairly succinct timeline, we've also simultaneously tasked them with a lot of other necessary work to get completed.
Thank you, Senator. And I guess I will turn that into a question. Was that something that was brought up by the local governments as to why they couldn't get something done in the 120 days? Because of the conflict with the planning requirement?
Okay. It was something that we did hear about, that, you know, they have, you know, these other requirements and things that they have to meet, so that can cause delays as well because they have staff committed to different areas trying to update things. So I think they have a lot of different competing priorities. And so just being able to balance those things, if they're having staffing shortages, if they're having the other things that they're needing to put in place with changes that are happening, new requirements that are occurring. That's definitely something that we heard early on in the audit and as we continued throughout, just some of those challenges that they face. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to release the State Auditor's Office. And then we do have a number of representatives that are available. Not sure if they want to make comments or if they just want to be available for member questions. City of Bellingham, we have a couple of individuals, City of Richland, City of Shoreline, City of Vancouver, and Snohomish County. If any of you, so we have somebody from the Richland Planning Department who has their hand up. As others want to make comments of this list that I just went down through, go ahead and put your hands up and I will recognize you as you do. So from the Richland Planning Office, go ahead.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Mike Stevens and I'm the planning manager for the city of Richland. We are a city of almost 65,000 folks. We are part of the Tri-Cities and we are growing by leaps and bounds. And to answer some of the questions or address a few of the things that have been mentioned here, the lack of ability to hire planners has been difficult. A number of jurisdictions here and around the Tri-Cities, along with myself here in Richland, we've had openings that have taken upwards of 12 months to try to fill just because we're not getting qualified applicants. So there's definitely a shortage of folks out there that are wanting to be in the planning profession. With that being said, once we do hire folks, they usually end up being straight out of school or from a different state, that most of which don't have planning processes that are very similar at all to what we have here in the state of Washington. So the learning curve for these young planners is quite substantial. And so that plays a role in turnaround times. In addition, I would say that the complexity of a lot of the applications, given the large amount of regulatory requirements that we have, sometimes makes reviewing things in a timely manner extremely difficult, especially when you're trying to get a report ready for a hearing examiner review and you're going through 5,000 pages of reports and then 700 written comments from the neighbors. And so just the amount of time that a lot of these applications take, given the fact that most of the easy land to develop has already been developed in most of our jurisdictions. And so we're in areas that are, within shoreline jurisdiction or adjacent to wetlands or other critical areas. And obviously that makes a difference, to the community as a whole. And then finally, I just wanted to state that, yes, things like the periodic updates that we have to do on different cycles and so forth does make a difference as well. Here in Richland, I have a planning staff of, besides myself, 2 planners. And I don't have the money to go forward and hire new planners or additional planners to help. And so we're very limited as to what we can do when it comes to some of these applications and still meet our statutory requirements to get our comp plan updated or our shoreline master program updated or critical areas code updated. And so those are some of the difficulties that the different jurisdictions have. And this is my 3rd jurisdiction in Washington. I spent 17 years over in Pacific County, where for most of that time I was the only planner. I spent 5 years in West Richland, where I was the only planner. And now I'm, the planning manager, but I have a staff of 2. So, it's difficult to meet turnaround times. I think most of the day-to-day permits, building permits after plats, subdivisions, binding site plans, et cetera, have been approved. Those don't take that long because all of the difficult issues have been addressed with the plats themselves. So the turnaround time for, the building department and planning department to check setbacks and those things, here in Richland, we're within 20 days on most of our normal building permit applications. It's the more complex land use projects, subdivisions, conditional use permits, shoreline permits, et cetera, that take the additional time. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up is from Shoreline, which would be Ray Allshouse.
Sorry about that. Okay. Members of the committee, I am Ray Allshouse, building official, speaking on behalf of the city of Shoreline. We extend our thanks to the audit team for their thorough evaluation and recommendations. Their performance audit highlighted several detailed items, including 6 recommendations that do apply to Shoreline. We appreciate their noting that available vacant land can be difficult to build on and that regulations have grown more complex over the last few decades. In fact, there is very little vacant land in Shoreline, and the majority of our development applications are for redevelopment of areas that are intentionally upzoned to encourage new housing and development near regional transit, most notably the 2 new light rail stations that will open later this year. In January 2024, the city kicked off a permit process improvement effort to evaluate the entire process using principles of continuous improvement. Through this review and implementation of process improvements, the city will incorporate necessary changes to comply with Senate Bill 5290 mandated to go into effect in 2025. Through this permit process improvement work, we anticipate implementing recommendation 1 and 3 through 6. Recommendation number 2 of the audit is to analyze cost of service and staffing levels needed to achieve the 120-day performance. With better documentation and a roadmap of how to streamline the process noted earlier, the city anticipates an ability to effectively measure the typical amount of staff time necessary. As stated multiple times today, the audit further notes that only 1/3 of local governments report on permit timelines, and even fewer include all information required by law. Future shoreline efforts will include a more thorough reporting of timelines, as well as including all required elements noted within statute, as well as the recently passed provisions of Senate Bill 5290. Finally, an effort is already underway to develop citywide key performance indicators to track and report on the performance of all notable city services on a regular basis. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And next we'll go to City of Bellingham, Mr. Nabafeld.
Good afternoon, committee members and representatives of the Auditor's Office. My name is Kurt Nabafeld. I'm the Development Services Manager for the Bellingham Planning and Community Development Department, and I oversee the land use, environmental, and building permitting processes here. Also joining me today is Callie Presley, who is our Permit Systems Business Analyst. Just like to thank you for the opportunity to comment today, as well as participate in the audit. We want to thank the Auditor's Office for their professionalism during the audit and for their respect of our ongoing workloads. We'd also like to thank them for their acknowledgement of the complexity of the land use permitting. And as you've heard today from other folks, that the easy land has essentially already been developed. Bellingham understands the importance of permitting processes in relationship to housing production and economic development, and we're committed to continually improving our land use review processes. We agree with the recommendations. We're already implementing or have plans to implement them in the near future. I've provided a few examples of that in our response to the audit, which is included in the report. We're currently revamping our workflow to ensure accurate permit tracking. That actually caused some issues obtaining review timeliness during the audit. We've entered into contracts with outside reviewing agencies and consulting firms to help. We're also focusing on filling vacancies within our department. Our new permit system business analyst is actively working to ensure we're meeting state reporting requirements, analyzing our processes, and again, implementing that continuous improvement. One of the questions today was about staffing challenges. I'd like to just note that during the audit review period, we had 9 vacancies out of our 18 dedicated staff. So that played a significant role in this. One interesting thing that was also mentioned was just the availability of planners out there to help with the workload. One of the things that we found through one of the agency or the firms that we were contracting with is that we actually were looking for the same types of people. So even the private firms that provide these services, they're also having trouble finding quality workforce. Bellingham is committed to having effective and predictable and streamlined permitting processes and finding ways to say yes versus no. We appreciate the recommendations and we intend to participate in the upcoming Lean webinar. I just want to thank you again and thank you for the opportunity, as well as the State Auditor's Office, and I or Callie are available to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Eichen, if it's okay, I'd like to go ahead and allow Callie Presley to go ahead and finish up, because she's also from Bellingham, and then we'll get to you. So, Callie? Callie, if you can unmute.
Hello, good afternoon. Members of the committee, we would like to thank you and the state audit team for the opportunity and allowing us to provide comments today. My name is Callie Presley, and I'm the Permitting Systems Business Analyst with the City of Bellingham, supporting the Planning and Community Development Department with providing data-driven recommendations in areas where improvements may be needed in their current systems and processes. The city values transparency, predictability, and accountability. Therefore, we are assessing the permitting system and processes for any potential enhancements to optimize our staff's performance when reviewing permit applications. Next, we will establish key performance indicators to measure performance and track the time it takes to process permits, ensuring that we meet the state mandated timeline and annual reporting requirements under the Growth Management Act. Also, I will be working with the department in standardizing their current workflows to bring structure primarily in the planning division. This is a corrective action we will be pursuing to enforce proper documentation and status updates by our staff to adequately measure our review times versus applicants' response time. We will develop standard operating procedures and training guides to facilitate smooth adoption of the next workflows. In addition, we will consider all recommendations that were provided in this audit. I want to point out that we have implemented some improvements utilizing the lean methods to reduce delays, errors, and waste throughout our permitting processes in 2015, reducing the number of required meetings, streamlining completeness review. The city contracted in 2023 a third-party reviewer to help with permit volume to staff up for busy times. And lastly, we're going to continue to practice continued process improvement. And this concludes my comments for today on behalf of the City of Bellingham. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Eichen, thank you for being patient and letting the two folks from Bellingham go together. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee members, for allowing us to provide our perspectives and to comment on the audit process. I'd like to echo the jurisdictions that went before me in saying that it was a very professional and respectful process. We appreciate the audit committee and the way they conducted the process, and were clear in their communications and also patient with us as we worked through other priorities and in getting them the data that they needed. So overall, very positive comments on the experience that we had with this audit. My name is Chad Eichen. I'm Director of Community Development for the City of Vancouver. Also with me is Jason Nortz. He's our Development Review Manager. Between the two of us, we oversee land use review, building review, building inspections, and our engineering intake and engineering permits. We don't handle engineering review in our department, but we work very closely with our partners in Public Works on engineering reviews. We appreciate the recommendations of the audit team. We've already begun to implement and respond to most of those. We have built a culture over the past 30 years since I've been at the City of Vancouver anyway, of creating a process that's customer friendly and responsive and predictable. The audit pointed out some areas where we do need improvement, and so we appreciated that. And so, as I mentioned, we're working on several of those areas, making sure that we're publishing all of the data that we do collect and that are required to publish and make available to the public. We're working with our partners in Public Works to shorten the timelines for every subsequent review. So instead of every time someone makes revisions to their plans, having the city having 28 days to review those changes, that timeline should get shorter and shorter every time there's another set of revisions that's returned to us. So we're going to make those internal changes as well. I'd just like to conclude by thanking the committee, thanking the audit team, and happy to answer any questions you might have. And Jason's here in case I missed anything. Jason?
Okay, thank you. I don't see any members with their hands up for questions, but if any members do have questions for our local governments, please raise your hand in Zoom or in person. Seeing none, I think that concludes this presentation. Thank you to the State Auditor's Office as well as our local government partners.